This is the fun part, roughing it in, where all the potential still remains. As you can see, I'm using a fairly large brush. It's probably a 2-inch flat, and just laying in this greeny blue colour over the whole drawing. Technically it's called a Verdaccio. It's a method going back centuries where you would have underpainted everything tonally. And then quite quickly I'm being careful to follow some of the drawing that I've established, because for me the drawing is important. I do like realism, and drawing is the foundation of realism. And the value in doing the drawing carefully is that it actually, in the long run, I always find saves time, because you're not going to have to go back and correct. If you just rough it all in with a brush, you're really going to get things exactly right. You can see here putting in the background with a biggish brush, and when I move away from following the outline of the puffin, I'll go larger again, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is it does save time using as large a brush as you can, but the other, it leaves brush marks, because even though superficially people always say that my work is photographic, it's really not if you see an original. So you can see just by the negative space of the ground, the puffin is starting to emerge. Even after all these years, I still love the magic. That's one of the most important things in the studio, the tone strip there. But we'll talk about that in more detail at some point. Now starting to establish a little belly. And you see it's slightly darker than the water. And I'll be careful, I'll be finding the edge, but I won't be too bothered if the edge sort of bleeds into the water, because there'll be a mixture of hard and soft edges. And what I've probably learned more than anything over 35 years is not to do everything hard, and not to find all the edges all the time. Again, I'll probably drag that brush just over the edge. But this is all at this stage, it's the underpainting. So this will be the first layer, usually done within a day. And it'll be mostly just this green that I've mixed up with white added to adjust it tonally. And it's a really good, quick way of establishing everything without having to worry about colour. And what I'm doing on his foot there, it's not paint that I'm putting on, it's paint that I'm actually taking off. So one of the reasons I've got the ground colour that you can see is oil paint by its very nature is transparent. So clearing back to the ground here as I'm doing, you can see his foot and his leg already stand out, and where it's going to be reflected. So when I come to do the colour on top of that, the fact that it's not green like everything else, the transparency of the paint will let it glow through. And then I'm starting here to go in and add a little bit more detail. It's all, realism is all a process of refinement. So you're starting things quite broadly and crudely, and then with oil paint especially, you can just go on and on to wherever you want to take it in terms of refining the elements. But these square brushes, which I would say will be done for, well, they'll be used for 80% of this part of the process, are excellent. They give you a really nice variety of strokes. You can do a thin line, you can do a broad edge, you can leave the marks from the brush in the paint, which is nice then for anyone who views the original. And for those who don't know, the stick that I'm resting on, just to keep my hand off the wet paint, is called a mahl stick, which is a fantastic but simple tool. This is the first stage where I'm using a round brush, which is probably a number 1. So obviously for the type of detail I like to do, then small brushes are are very useful, and good brushes. I really don't like to paint with a brush that's lost its point and has got a bit tired. So the beauty of having done that wash in oils is that this layer will stay workable and really nice to work in all day. So I'm putting a second layer on here, and again it's refinement, so I'm starting to look a little bit more at what's happening with the water and making decisions all the time. I'm following one photograph as a starting point with lots of other photographs to augment the information, and also my own experience and knowledge of what it's like being in that world with these birds. And you can see that a lot of those marks are just one or two brush strokes. And the detail that there is will be limited. And again, I think that's interesting in a painting. There'll be large areas of this which are just simple and tonal. Right, now we're starting to add a little bit of colour. And depending on how the first day goes, this might not happen until the second layer. But with his beak especially, again in terms of getting it to pop against all that green, it's going to really help to get that first layer of red in. It does help to have a steady hand, which after years, I mean in my case it's 35 years, it really has got easier and easier in terms of things which might have been sort of, they'd have felt, they'd sort of hold your breath and difficult. I think it's like the almost like muscle memory in your brain, the connections of the synapses. Right, we've jumped a little bit there because we're new to the filming, so we'd missed out completing the first day. So this is now the second day. So as you can see, there's a little bit more colour and detail. He's already got a little bit of puffing character going on. He's got a little bit of orange on his leg. So this is, you can probably see even from the video with the reflection, it's thicker, creamier paint. This is what you would call the ala primer layer. So the underpainting is completely dry. With painting so thinly, it will go off in a couple of days. I'd probably leave it longer than that, just to be sure. But you can always add one of the proprietary drying mediums. And also what really helps is just putting it in a warm place. The polytunnel for us is a fantastic spot for drying paintings. So again, as large a brush as I can get away with in the water, away from the puffing, and then coming in. This is called cutting in, where you use the edge of the brush. And again, if you practice using a square brush, you've got a lot of control over even a largish brush. And once again, as I've already said, the pot of colour which was used for the Verdaccio, I saved that mixed up colour in a pot with a lid on that's airtight. So I've got that available, and initially, especially the water and the bird, will be done with exactly the same colour as went into the Verdaccio. So we're back again at this process of refinement. In even an average photograph, the variation in tone, the amount of subtle changes, and I would say a large part of realism is about tone as much as it is about colour. I'm really noticing not just your real lights and your real darks, but where your half tones are, so where you're somewhere in between the two. And if you like realism, then the more subtle these observations are, then the more realistic the painting will be. And there's something about oil paint, for me especially, which really lends itself to creating an illusion of the real world in that way, by using tone. And what I'm trying to do all the time, again, even though people are generally complimentary, I think, when they talk about the detail in my work is do just enough detail. And it's all relative. This, compared with how some artists paint, will be detailed, but not fussily so. And suggesting the reflections as I am there, and the little bit that I did on the breast, you're already seeing on the bird, just by that change in tone near where he meets the surface where it's catching the light, that's suggesting that he's got form, and that he's or she is a three-dimensional object floating in space. And so some of that pausing with the brush is just establishing the relationship of the brush with the canvas. But I've found all this a little bit more difficult than usual, because to keep my head out of the painting, and it's an aspect of this film and the work that we're working on, I'm sort of standing off slightly to one side of the canvas and leaning in at a strange angle. So it's just making the process just a little bit less straightforward than it usually would be. Now, this is really important. The highlights here are nowhere near pure white. They're actually quite toned down. It'll be white with a mixture of the watercolour. And what I've found, again, with many years of experience, is really to limit the brightest highlights and the darkest darks, is to use them as aces. I think even 10 years ago, I'd be searching hard for a lot more white on the puffin and a lot more of the brighter colours on his feet. But it is definitely a case of less is more. You can see already, and it's been helped by using the coloured ground, that leg is popping quite a lot against the colour of the water. It's one of the things you'd see it if you look at any decent underwater photograph of a snorkeling puffin. But one of the things that stays in your mind's eye is how much those feet stand out. Quite often the first thing you see when they're swimming towards you is the brightness of the feet. Now I'm into the much smaller brushes, and again, not a lot of this will be needed, but it's important to me where it is. At this sort of distance, with this sort of view, you would see his little claws, and you would see a little bit of detail of the scaling on his legs as well. So I love those Winsor & Newton, I think they are, Cotman watercolour brushes, but with thin oils. They're absolutely exquisite. And if you look after them, again, it's something we'll talk about. Good brushes will last you a long time. And, they are expensive, so it's worth looking after them. And it's still exciting for me as the artist, because you're not guaranteed success. So when you get to this stage and you think, oh yes, it's going to work, it feels good. And this isn't even two whole days here. This is probably into the afternoon of the second day. And what I've had to do is leave some of the refining around the eye and the more subtle detail. Not quite yet got the camera angles right. These little bubbles are a nice touch. They're obviously getting around a lot, and you will often get bubbles. I'm imagining with putting the bubbles in that he's just come to a halt after paddling in and left a little trail of bubbles.